Hey all, thanks so much for coming to my talk. I've worked in detection and response for the last decade, and I have made a lot of mistakes. But especially when it comes to metrics, and this is the talk I had wish I'd seen. Today you'll get three things. You'll get a framework that I built to make much better metrics, a new maturity model I've been using to describe and measure detection and response capabilities, and lots of examples. And I have a favor for the room. This room echoes quite a bit, and I can almost not hear myself. Thank you. So my story with metrics starts on a Monday morning. I'm only a couple months into a new job, and I get a message from my boss. He's like, the board of director meeting's coming up, and he's looking for updated program metrics. And you can tell by this text exchange, I'm new to senior management. I'm eager to please. I don't ask any questions. And so I send a message to my new team. And I'm like, hey, what have we presented in the past? And the response, oh no, bad news. Our last manager pretty much made those up. And good news, I'm going to do so much better. So how many of you have had this happen where you inherit someone else's metrics awfulness? Yes. Yes. This is usually our starting place. Metrics that haven't been well thought out, or maybe even worse, made up or fudged to avoid questions. And so I did what a lot of you probably did. I Googled it, and then I ended up just copying the metrics that I used in my last job, and that's led me to using a lot of bad metrics. But so what? Like, why should I care about metrics? Well, what do you care about metrics? Audience participation. Informed decisions. Why else might we care about metrics? Budget. What was that? Improvement. Yeah. One reason is exactly that. Yeah, improvement. Carl Pearson, he's a late 1800s, 1900s guy. He's usually seen as like the founder of modern statistics. He's got this quote he's famous for: "That which is measured improves." That which you measure improves. It sounds like a great plug for metrics, right? It says, why they're important, but there's an implied warning in that message. What if you're measuring the wrong thing? There's this paper that's written by these two guys out of MIT, Hauser and Katz. They have this paper that's called Metrics, You Are What You Measure. And they talk about how as you pay more attention to metrics, you start to make decisions and actions to improve those metrics. So the metrics you choose will improve. And over time, you'll become what you measure. Metrics also help us communicate what we do and why people should care. I took this really great class by Edward Tufte. It's maybe one of the best classes you can ever take on presenting data. Has nothing to do with security, but it talks a lot about the mistakes people make when presenting data. He's got a whole part about terrible PowerPoints, and so that's just fun in general. But he's got this quote that says, "Metrics reveal data. Metrics are a tool that enable us to present the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time with the least ink in the smallest space." And why? Well, yeah, let's be honest, because we need budget, and we need headcount, and metrics are usually the tool we use to communicate that. But why are security metrics so hard? Why are security metrics so hard? Data's always changing. Not everyone knows what they want, yeah. I've also heard we're trying to prove a negative, right? Like nothing happens is good news in our world oftentimes. In my own personal experience, metrics are hard. Security metrics are hard because I'm a security engineer. I don't care that much about metrics. Here's a much less famous quote. Metrics are an annoying PowerPoint I need to update every month. And that one's from me. A bit about me. I'm a senior staff engineer at Airbnb. I work on fun things that aren't metrics, like enterprise security, threat detection, incident response, and I really love my job. I live in Austin, Texas with my wife and my 3-year-old son, Liam, here, and I love being a husband and a dad, but there's one thing I'm really good that intersect across all my roles as husband, dad, and security engineer. I'm really good at making mistakes. And this is the point of the talk where I'm supposed to gain credibility with all of you and tell you about my accolades and 15 years of experience, but really, I've just been making mistakes. Let me tell you about 5 of them. And the first terrible mistake I've made is losing sight of the goal. How many of you work the alert queue or in some sort of on-call or operational type role? Yes, a couple of you. The tired people in the room looking at your phones. Yes, this is my 10-year anniversary of being continuously on call. And for those of us that spend our days triaging alerts and responding to fires, it can be really easy to lose sight of the goal. And so we end up describing our frontline operational work with metrics like this one. And some of you have seen this alert. Yes, you're nodding your heads. And this metric shows us the number of security alerts per month. I don't know why we chose per month. That seemed like it made sense. Excel fills that in automatically for you. And if you take a closer look at this example, you'll see that in the past year, March and April had the most alerts. My boss will ask a question about that. And if we keep looking at it, it looks like alerts are generally trending down. Did we do that? Did we stop logging something? Did new IPS rules come out? And I was like, nope, turning those off. Alert count has become the heartbeat metric for security operations. So instead of rooting back to our goal of detecting threats, responding quickly, we've reduced ourselves to cries for help. I've come to call this metric the operational burden we've inflicted upon ourselves. Another title might be, we're doing things, it's crazy out there. Maybe it's fear-driven, scare leadership with a bunch of alerts. And sometimes we try to make it better. We break it down by true and false positive. I've been proud of doing this before. But if I'm honest, I'm not really sure what I was trying to say with this metric. That I've got a lot of false positives? What's a good true to false positive ratio? Is it the same for every alert? If I reduce my false positives, do I reduce my visibility of the threats? If I have too many false positives, do I miss true positives then? So the problem I'm running into first is I don't know where to start with metrics. I Googled it. This is the first one that came up, so I used it. And detection and response has, in the last 10 years I've been doing it, it's come a long way. We've matured as a field. We have lots of great tools, but I'm stuck here making metrics about alert volume. So I needed a starting point. And so to give you a starting point, I thought about what in detection and response we could measure to help us make decisions and see if we're improving. And so I use the acronym SAVER. It's not a great acronym, but there you are. And the S is we want to show how we're streamlining, how our operations are improving our efficiency, our accuracy, either through automation, better tooling, better processes. And we want to raise awareness about what we're learning from threat intel. Share things like the threats and trends we should be prepared for. We want to measure our vigilance. How fast, how prepared are we for those top threats? Can we detect them at all? And as we learn about new threats and trends, how's that guiding our threat hunts? As we explore our networks, what are we finding? And then as our detections fire and our threat hunts turn into incidents, What's our readiness? How quickly are we able to organize and respond to incidents? And how complete are our playbooks? So when you're thinking about your own metrics, think about which category your metric would fall under. And this can help you tie it back to the outcome. And I like to start with just one metric from each category, because we make a lot of metrics, or we're asked to make a lot of metrics. I'm asked to make a lot of metrics. And that doesn't help us focus either. And so for each metric, we should ask, what question does this metric answer? So what question was I trying to answer with this metric? And I think it is, are false positives taking up too much of my time? Or do I even have enough time to look at everything and I'm missing true positives? But it's about time. It's something about time. Another question you can ask yourself is, how do I control this metric? How do I make it better? So how do I make this metric look better? It's not a trick question. How do I make this metric better? What do I have to do? Turn off alerts. Verify what? And then what do I got to do? What do I got to do to make this happier? You got to tune them. You got to tune your alerts. How's that going? Yeah. It hasn't been. It sucks. And if I map it to my Sabre framework, it's a streamlined metric. And those are usually around efficiency, accuracy, automation. And I have two problems with this metric. That metric doesn't tell me where I'm spending most of my time. It feels like it does, because there's volume. And the other problem I have is that the only control I have here is either tuning or turning the alert off. So how do we make it better? And here's a graph of time spent on false positives. And for now, I totally took out the true positives. I'm OK if we need to spend time on those. But instead of tracking how many false positives, I'm tracking how much time, how much human time is being spent on them. Now, how much time you spend working on an alert, you could measure that from the time the alert gets assigned to when it gets marked a false positive. Now, if y'all are anything like me, when I get on my triage duty and there's 10 alerts sitting there in the queue there, I just grab them all and assign them to myself all at once. Doesn't even matter if I'm going to start working on them. And why do I do that? What metric is making me do that? Mean time to acknowledge. Or SLAs. Yeah, that's right. When did somebody click the assign to me button? Which thankfully in most platforms you can do select all and just assign to yourself. So you can do it really quick. So my argument here is maybe stop measuring that, or at least stop caring about it so much, because it turns out when you hire a whole bunch of engineers that are lazy, because that's why we all got in this field, right? Yes, thank you. We're acknowledging it. We're going to find the easiest or laziest way to get something down. So when you come up with a metric, think about, all right, what are people going to do to hack my metric? So how do we control this metric? How do we improve this metric? How do I make the amount of time that I have to humanly spend on something? Automate it. We get more automation tools. This is something that I have seen the most improvement in our area. And as we get more automation tools, and some of us learn a little bit of Python, the number of events may not equate to how much time we're spending on false positives. And then as you automate, you can carry the time that you spent manually on that and carry it over your automation. Because I want to point out, this isn't how long it took my automation to run. I didn't put a ton of sleep statements or something terrible in there. I'm carrying over. This is how long this ticket used to take me to go investigate. Here's how long it takes now. Move it over to automation. And now I'm not incentivized to just like tune it or turn it off. I'm incentivized to find where am I spending the most time, my manual time, the one I don't want to be doing, so that I can automate it. All right, second mistake. And the second mistake is using quantities that lack controls, or more simply said, because I haven't had enough coffee, measuring the things you can't change. All right, mean time to recover, classic incident response metric. It'll be in your Google search. And in this example, you can see that recovery was lower in September and October, and then we get into November and December and January, it goes up. But then the team pulled together. Look at that. February, absolutely crushing it. March, now we've got it. Or maybe this is Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. Okay, now we're back at the office finally, or we're back online and caring a little bit more. And it's funny, I've spent the last year researching metrics for detection and response, and I've learned something. We're obsessed with speed in incident response. Vast majority of results when I search detection and response metrics. Mean time to detect, mean time to respond, time to contain, time to recover. I'm not going to argue that speed isn't important, but using time as the sole measurement that we have across incident phases totally throws out things like quality and effectiveness. But my big problem with this metric is that security incidents have a lot of variability. Every incident we have is very different, especially when you get in an incident and all the downstream activities that are really out of your hands. Those are really hard to make any change for. There's a lot of dependencies in an incident, especially when you get closer to recovery. And a lot of that's not controlled by your team. So a graph like this, it doesn't help me make any decisions because it doesn't reveal what's controllable. And what happens when you have a metric you can't control? Can't measure it. You stop caring. You're like, all right, great, cool. It made a pretty mountain. I love it. So I've tried this recently, and I've tried to break out response time across the different phases. And here, I've filtered out any of the built-in time I need for quality. Every response playbook we have has some expected built-in time you need. You can be very hand-wavy about it, too. This is going to take 10 minutes. It's going to take 20 minutes for this to happen. Sure, as you mature your capabilities, you can bring down that built-in time. But that's not the focus for these graphs. Here we're looking at what can I control today? How do I get better today? There's this really great talk. You can find it on YouTube. It's called The Tension Between Absolutes and Ambiguity in Security. It's by Eric Brandwine. He's from AWS. And in it, he says, when you look at a metric, it should immediately answer, what do you want me to do? What do you want from me? And one of the easiest ways to do that is to make the answer 0 when there's nothing to do. So here, I've filtered out all the time we can't reduce right now. So if there's nothing for us to do, I've made the answer 0. The other nice thing about this is there's 5 charts on here, and I could put like 25 on here. And there's a whole bunch that are 0, your eye won't go to them. It won't even matter. But your eye will jump right down to remediate. Oh, that's where it is. That's where the problem is. And so now I know where to go. I know that when I hit the remediation phase for, looks like one incident in December, I ran into issues. So then I go look there. And then maybe there's more things for me to filter out, or maybe there's actual improvements. But I know where to go, and I know at what phase I'm looking at. Mistake number 3, thinking proxy metrics are bad. Or thinking about an amazing metric that's insanely expensive to create when all you really needed was something that was good enough. And here's a great example. So a long time ago, I was on a team, and I decided that we wanted to know what our MITRE ATT&CK coverage was. And this was before it was like the cool thing to do and every product did it. And so we determined, all right, we're going to have to write tests across the entire framework. And then once we got going, we were like, all right, one test per technique, that's not going to cut it. It's not going to tell us much of anything. And then we also have Windows, Mac, and Linux. So we're going to need a couple of tests for all of those. So after years of developing tests, investing in tooling, we finally had the data to visualize our attack detection coverage, which was great. Side note, I saw a tweet the other day, and I really enjoyed it. It said, we need to do a better job of mocking vendors that claim 100% MITRE attack coverage, for many reasons, obviously. But I've seen the carnage that 100% MITRE attack is. It's alert fatigue, terrible alert fatigue. Anyway, we spent years gathering all this data. It's cool. But really, all we wanted to know was, where do we need to prioritize our detection building? So instead, try this. Rather than going for all of MITRE attack, start by thinking about what are the top 5 threats you care about the most. Don't overthink it. Look at your external threat intel. Think about what type of industry you're in, what type of environment you have. What are the obvious top 5 things that are affecting those? And then look at your incident trends. What kind of incident do you just keep having? And then link those back to your security, your organization's security risk. Really simple question. What would be a really bad day for your company? And the next question is, if data was exfiltrated from your company, what would make your chief privacy officer cry the most? What's great about this is you can visualize it metric with a teardrop, and then you can fill the teardrop based on like how much it would make them cry. I think Edward Tufte would like it too, because it'd be like a picture filling up. Anyway, once you've got your top 5 prioritized, you can start your detection development from there. I like to workshop them. Everyone takes one of the top 5 threats, and then we'll use attack to derive all the different techniques and sub-techniques. So then as you write your tests and your detections, over time, you will slowly end up building yourself this prioritized MITRE attack coverage map, but you won't have all the alert fatigue and this super upfront costly metric. Plus now you might be best friends with your chief privacy officer. Dreams happen. Mistake number 4, not adjusting to the altitude. And as someone that has floated back and forth between management and individual contributor, I'm very guilty of this one. How many of you have tried to explain the MITRE attack framework to a board of directors? Yes, I love it. Why not? Let's do it. I think detection coverage and MITRE attack is like, those are some of the better new metrics we've come up with. But wow, we've done a really bad job at explaining it at the leadership level. I've seen one of those MITRE attack heat maps from a specific vendor just slapped into a board of directors deck as if like that meant anything to them. It had red and green though, which I hear is, they like that. More green good, more red money. So we need metrics at every altitude, and the higher the altitude, the less it becomes about detection and response, and the more it's about the impact to the business. So it's helpful for me to think about it like a pyramid. For the business, the impact we make is reducing the cost of an incident or a breach. Or another way we can think about it too is how costly we can make it for an attacker to cause impact. And so our metric at the top of our pyramid, those North Star metrics, are how quickly can we alert the organization to a threat, and how quickly can we get things back to business as usual. And then under that top layer, we can talk about our coverage and effectiveness. Can we detect the top threats to the business? Do we have playbooks for the attacks that are most likely to happen? And do we have the visibility we need? And then under that layer, how well do our tools perform? How much time do I spend trying to figure out what logs I need and where to find them? How quickly does it take for me to search them? Organizing your metrics in a pyramid can help you connect your lower layer metrics to that North Star metric all the way up to what your impact is to the business. Organizing your metrics can also help you connect your metrics to the security organization. It turns out detection and response isn't always the best strategy. If your metrics are showing you that your mean time to respond is trending up because you have a recurring type of incident, sometimes the best way to reduce that cost isn't by improving your streamlined or your readiness metrics. It's by putting a new control in place, a prevention, to stop that type of incident from even occurring. And what's great is when you have this pyramid that basically connects into the rest of the security organization about how you make that change, you can shift over to somebody else's and go, hey, look, so our mean time to respond, it's trending up, and this is why. And your metric here is that you should fix it because we can only hire so many people and run so fast. Mistake number 5, asking why instead of how. And I love to ask why. Why didn't we detect that sooner? Why are we still missing the firewall logs? And as a dad, I have lots of why questions. Why did we bring the car seat when all we took was one taxi ride the whole trip? Why do we need 4 suitcases? Why didn't we bring the stroller? And why can't Liam walk by himself? He is a boss here and living his absolute best life. But in all of these examples, why isn't helping. So instead, I've learned to move straight to the how and start figuring out what actually needs to be done. And often answering how allows you to identify the underlying problem much faster and from a much more positive perspective, especially from your spouse and coworkers. How can I carry Liam, suitcases, and a car seat through the airport? How can we detect these type of threats sooner? How can we respond faster? So we talk about explaining what we do and why. When I interviewed with my current VP, she asked me, how do we build a modern detection and response program? How do we get there? I was like, great, cool, 1-question interview. Love these. Simple question, not a simple answer. How do we describe where we are today and where we're going? And it made me think about maturity models. And my first exposure to maturity models was the hunting maturity model, HMM. Is anyone not familiar with the hunting maturity model? Okay, so the hunting maturity model comes out, I don't know, maybe like 7, 8 years ago now. And it had different levels of maturity, from initial all the way up to leading. And it talked about what you would be capable of doing at each level of maturity. Are you like, I've got dumb IOCs like an IP address, and I can search them and find out whether or not my laptops are calling out to those? Or is it, all the way up to leading where I'm absorbing all this information and I'm detecting anomalies in my network traffic? And so it gave us a language, so when I go talk to a company or coworker, I'm like, all right, where are we at in our maturity with threat hunting? We have a common language to talk about that. Common language will say, where are we now? What tools and processes do we have? What's the current situation? And then how do we get there? What's the next level of our maturity? And what's our objective? How do we achieve them? So I created the threat detection and response maturity model. And the TDR maturity model builds off of the hunting maturity model, but it expands it across all the different areas of detection and response. And there's a lot to it. At the end, there'll be a link to the full maturity model that you can use. And the first pillar I thought about when measuring maturity was observability, or having the tools and logs that give us visibility into our entities and user activity. Proactive threat detection, where we focus on pulling in that threat intel, prioritizing our detections that we want to build, and the hunts we want to perform. And then rapid response, how quickly can we go from triage, analysis, to response, with all the forensic capabilities we need? And then you can use these pillars and these 14 capabilities to describe and measure where you are today and where you want to go next. So for each of the 14 capabilities, you'll score yourself in 4 different areas: process, tools, documentation, and testing. And you'll rate yourself from initial all the way up to leading. And here in the slide, I have like general guidance, but within the framework itself, there's much more specific direction around each capability. So for example, if we were to rate our detection engine capability, we think about what processes we have. Do I have a process when I want to create a detection that looks for first-time occurrences? Do I have a process that defines what's the most optimal way to find thresholds? And then we rate our tools. Do we centralize our detections in a single location? And then documentation, or the lack of documentation in most of my cases. And then testing. How do I validate that the logic that I have to determine that first-time occurrence is actually working today? So then as you go through and rate them, I like to rate them individually, like think about them, and then get together as a group, discuss them, and then come to some sort of agreement about where we stand on those. And then what's cool is you can visualize it. And here's an example of how you can take the ratings and show at a high level where you are today across those 3 pillars, and then where you plan to be by some target, we'll say end of year, based on the projects you planned and initiatives. And I love using this because, one, it's simple. I can show it to leadership and they don't get too confused. And there's lots of underlying detail that back it up, so I like that. I can dive really deep into something. But I also really like it because when we do project planning and we're figuring out what we're going to do, and then I do the little exercise and be like, all right, so like what bars move because of this? And then like none of the bars move. It's like, all right, maybe we're not working on the right things. Like maybe we should work on something else. So then as you do the work, you'll need metrics to show that you're getting better. And here's where the SABRE framework can come back in. So for each metric you'll create, you'll put it into this structure here. I wish I'd seen this before. You want to avoid my mistake number 1, losing sight of the goal, and ask, what question does this metric answer? And then what outcome are you looking to achieve? And then use the SABRE categories to tie it back to your North Star. And then you want to avoid my mistake number 2, using my quantities that lack control, not being able to control the metric. Don't forget, make it 0. Filter out what you can't control today. So understand, like, how do I control this metric? Because if it's something you can't control, don't bother measuring it. Because you're not going to be able to change it. You'll just be updating a graph that you can't do anything about. I was talking to a buddy of mine. He runs one of those big socks with the big monitors on the wall and the pew pew map. Yes. I haven't been in a large sock in a really long time. And I want everyone to know, who maybe hasn't been in one in a while, Pew Pew Map is alive and well. Like, the disappearance of Norse there did not hurt Pew Pew Map. Pew Pew Map's doing fine. Anyway, they were talking about pain points in their sock, and they were talking about their time to analyze metric was just going up all the time. And they could not figure out why. So they brought it up to the team, and they were like, hey, we've got to figure out how to bring down our time to analyze metrics. It's taking way too long. Let's think of some creative ways we could like improve on this. So guess what? You won't believe it. The team brought it down. And then guess what else went down? Quality of analysis. It'll take too long on my analysis. Fine, I'll make less time on the analysis. So then guess what goes up? True positives missed. So when you introduce a new metric, again, think about what risky behavior am I rewarding? It might not be a bad metric, but you might want to create some metrics to balance it out, because remember, you are what you measure. And then there's metric expiration. When do we not need this metric anymore? So when my only lever, or the only thing I could use, was alert tuning, turning them off, it may have made more sense to track alert volume. But now we've got lots of automation tools. I maybe don't even look at some of the alerts that fire because, some nice script runs and goes, nope, it's fine. I never look at it. So maybe it's time we expire our alert count metrics, or at least remove them from our leadership decks. And then there's data requirements. How much data will this metric require? How much effort will I need? Don't make my mistake and be like, I'm going to make this really amazing metric, but it's going to take years to build. Think about, what can I measure that's going to take me about a week to do? Because the reality of it is most of us have no time to build a new metric, and that's why we keep reusing the same metric over and over again. We're like, all right, I'm going to make this slide deck so much better next month. And then next month comes, and you're like, nope, I'm going to reuse this metric, and I'm going to put in the same stupid numbers yet again. So start very small. Think about, what is the easiest thing I could measure that we could control, that I could like do this in like a afternoon with a beer or something. So anytime I talk about metrics, I always get asked, so how do I change the bad metrics I'm already presenting to leadership? And I get it. Change is hard. Leadership doesn't like surprises. And they often have expectations that you'll be updating last month's slide deck. But I have a tip that's worked really well for me. So here, I've convinced my friend Dexter, he's still my friend, to get into near freezing water. This tub's at about 39 Fahrenheit. It's cold. And my son is absolutely loving it. He thinks this is great. People shake when they get in it. When he first got in it, he was shocked. His heart rate spiked. He gasped. He had to work to not hyperventilate. But then suddenly, clarity. And it's the same when you change your metrics. It's not going to be fun immediately. People are going to go into a state of shock, especially if they've been around those bad metrics a while. They've gotten used to them. They've gotten warm and cozy. But my tip is, embrace it. Push through the change. And bring it all together. So a lot of times, what we're trying to do when we're talking about detection responses, we're trying to tell a story. And to leadership, you don't have a whole lot of time. So your story has to be kind of short. And so it's really easy to like lose them. So here's like a dry run. Up front and center, we have our program maturity using the TDR maturity model. We're streamlining our operations, looking at what's taking the most amount of time, and we're automating it. We looked at our threat intel and incident trends. We're raising awareness about these top 5 threats to the company. We're focusing our time this quarter to build detections for these threats. Here's where we're tracking. And we've been exploring gaps in security controls relevant to those top 5 threats, and we've identified 3 new gaps. And from a readiness perspective, we have a reoccurring incident with a really long recovery time, so we've decided to work with our enterprise security team, implement a new control that will prevent this and these incidents from occurring. That's about as long as I have to say it. So now, instead of making wild guesses about whether you're improving and if the tools you're buying are making a difference, you can use the maturity model to measure your capabilities. Instead of using volume counts, fear tactics, and tired emojis, you can use Savor to get to the core of your metric, ask better questions, and map those to something you can control. And instead of focusing on 100% MITRE ATT&CK coverage, focus on the threats that matter the most. Find your top 5 threats, and work on having detection coverage that has real immediate impact today. So hopefully this talk is your wake-up call. Take a cold plunge and rethink your detection response metrics. Thank you very much.